Lloyd uses the opportunity to read all the books in the forbidden library. Albert gets dressed for the day, and he proceeds to the library with the servants prostrating to him. Lloyd is reading some books in the library with Grimoire keeping him company. When Albert arrives at the door, Grimoire alerts Lloyd of Albert's presence. As he opens the door and Lloyd tells him to hide, Albert walks into the room, and Lloyd is so excited to see him that he raises his head too fast, which makes the book on his head fly into Albert's hand. Lloyd sits and watches enthusiastically as Albert prepares to practice at the testing range. He uses his fire magic to take down a target to the amazement of the spectators. Lloyd applauds his effort, while Grimoire can't believe he gets to witness the second prince of the kingdom in action. Lloyd informs him that Albert is so smart and physically capable that people refer to him as the next potential king. This gives him authority to access various facilities in the castle, and Lloyd is always happy when Albert invites him to tag along because that's the only time he's allowed to use his magic. Lloyd gets off the bench, and Albert informs him that it's his turn to have a go at the practice range. Lloyd walks over to the line, but he realizes that he shouldn't look so impressive, so people won't think he's in contention for the throne. All he wants to do is study magic without drawing anyone's attention to him. He decides to make his fireball graze all the targets instead of hitting them squarely, but Grimoire tells him people will notice that it is harder to pull off. Lloyd decides to stick to his idea, and he makes his fireballs graze the targets. Everyone applauds his effort, but one of them teases him for only being able to graze the target. Grimoire is pissed by this because he knows it's harder to make the fireballs graze the target. Meanwhile, Lloyd is accessing the pros and cons of his technique, and Grimoire realizes he's addicted to magic knowledge. Albert decides to take a break, and he leaves Lloyd at the practice range to let loose the servants follow Albert, which makes Lloyd delighted to have the whole gallery to himself. He decides to try out so many ideas that he has been holding in. Grimoire wonders what he'll try, and Lloyd tells him he's going to try out his double incantation. Magic Grimoire tries to deter him, because only demons can do the double incantation trick. Since they have two mouths, Lloyd decides to absorb Grimoire into his hand, but he's surprised it works. Grimoire doesn't feel comfortable being assimilated into Lloyd's body. Lloyd decides to try and sync up with him so they can cast an advanced fire spell. Lloyd wonders if Grimoire can cast it, and Grimoire reminds him that advanced spells are child's play to him because he's a demon. Lloyd realizes he'll be able to cast it, and they begin casting it together. They barely say the full incantation before Grimoire gets sick. Lloyd wonders what's wrong with him, and Grimoire tells him he should be the one questioning his actions. He wonders what incantation Lloyd is saying, and Lloyd tells him it was a spell stack. Spell stacking is a way of abbreviating spells that require incantations to reduce their cast time. He explains to Grimoire that he was trying to cast 100 spells using that methodology. Grimoire is surprised by this, because spell stacking doesn't work that way. He reminds Lloyd that a single spell stack can only comprise a maximum of 3 spells at once. Lloyd is bummed out because it would take an eternity to cast the incantation of the spell he wants. Lloyd decides to take over Grimoire's mouth on his palm, but he also tries out his own to make sure he can talk through both. At the same time, Grimoire wonders if he's about to try out 2 advanced spell incantations at the same time, but Lloyd shuts him up because he needs his mouth. He begins casting the incantation, while Grimoire wonders how he's able to cast 2 different advanced. At the same time, he realizes that Lloyd is folding 2 forms of magic, and he's impressed by Lloyd's mana reserve. Grimoire keeps observing Lloyd as he does the double incantation, but he realizes the spell will be too powerful to point at anything, let alone a target. Casting the incantation, and a powerful beam is cast upwards. The beam is so powerful that it catches the attention of everyone in the kingdom. Prince Albert's attendants wonder why he gives Lloyd so much attention, and Albert realizes they don't have an eye for talent. He tells them that Lloyd made his fireball graze all the targets in the same way intentionally, which makes him a magic prodigy. He tells them Lloyd could become a great sage one day, which will make him a vital asset to his future. The attendants aren't surprised. He wants a great sage in his service since he could be the king in the future. Albert tells them he just wants to get along with his little brother. He tells them His brother should have taken down the targets in the training room by now. But his attendant tells him exaggerating. He looks out the window and he sees the sky is dark. He wonders why the sun is already setting at noon. Meanwhile, Grimoire is shaking in his books in their case, his hands as he looks at the result of Lloyd's spell. He's surprised. His spell blew a hole in the sky to change it from noon. Tight Lloyd marvels in his work before he realizes what he has done. He hastily dispels his spell so the sky can return to normal. Grimoire wonders what Lloyd is made of, while Lloyd is glad he was able to revert his spell. The next day, Grimoire picks up the daily papers and he reads the story about the blast in the sky made by Lloyd. He informs Lloyd about the story, but another story catches his eyes. He tells Grimoire about the story of a ranked adventuring companies, clearing difficult dungeons and collecting treasures. He's enchanted by the treasure the adventurers get and he decides to head out to a dungeon. He begins walking like a hypnotized zombie. Whole Grimoire does his best to stop him to no avail. Grimoire tells him everyone in the castle will freak out if he goes missing, but Lloyd tells him there's nothing a little magic can't solve. He shows Grimoire an acorn and he uses a plant last spell to form a replica of himself. Grimoire is impressed by this, but Lloyd decides to flex more and show Grimoire how sophisticated the replica is. Grimoire is convinced Lloyd will be able to slip out of the castle since he has such a good replica. Lloyd tells him his issue with using the replica is fooling SFA. He remembers when she told him. He grew by 7 mm, which surprised him. Grimoire is also surprised by how attentive she is, and Lloyd tells him he won't be able to fool her with a replica that dances like a dummy. He decides to make Grimoire inhabit the replica while he leaves the castle. He successfully escapes the castle, and he decides to play a call across to Grimoire. For some reason, his magical call requires a phone signal, but let's not talk about that. He asks Grimoire how things are looking on his end, and Grimoire tells him he's doing his best to represent him. The maids stare at Lloyd through the door, surprised that he's paying attention to his looks for the first time. Grimoire realizes that Lloyd's idea to transfer his consciousness to his replica was ingenious. Lloyd tells him to watch out for Silpha while doing his best impression of him. Grimoire checks out the replica he's inhabiting, and he's surprised that it has monarch circulation. He immediately gets an idea and he realizes that he can do whatever he wants. Now that Lloyd is out of the picture, he smiles like a maniac as he thinks about all the things he can do. Lloyd suddenly calls out to him and tells him he's counting on him to do his best. Grimoire is so touched by this that he's too stunned to speak. Lloyd calls out to him again and Grimoire tells him that he'll do his best till he gets back. Lloyd keeps flying, but he looks around and he stops. Though he was able to leave the castle without trouble, he realizes that he has no idea where to find a dungeon. He stays levitating, trying to think about his next move when he suddenly notices some movement on the ground. A lady is being chased by some orcs and Grimoire informs him that someone is in danger. The lady suddenly stops and she turns around to face the orcs. She takes them down easily under seconds and Lloyd realizes she's a martial artist from her battle style. He notices her breathing technique and he's impressed by it. The lady stands triumphantly over the orcs and she tells them to try their luck again. In another 100 years, Lloyd remembers a book that talked about people in foreign countries who channel their inner energy, called Kai, to create incredible techniques. The lady notices Lloyd hiding from her and she calls out to him. Lloyd is surprised. She was able to notice him from such a far distance, but he decides to meet her and ask her about her techniques in dungeons. Grimoire tells him that the lady may recognize him as the seventh prince. If he goes out to meet her, since the lady doesn't get a response from Lloyd, she decides to take him as her enemy. She rushes at him to attack him, but Lloyd hastily changes his appearance. She comes up to Lloyd, and he introduces himself as Robert, a rookie adventurer. He created an illusion from a mixture of his image and his brother's image to create an authentic appearance. The lady introduces herself to him as a B-rank adventurer and a martial artist. Lloyd wonders if she suspects his disguise, but Grimoire tells him the illusion is perfect. Meanwhile, Tao is falling head over heels for Robert because no male has paid her any attention since she left her dojo. She was glad she finally found someone interesting, and she decided to make Lloyd her boyfriend. even if hell has to freeze over, Lloyd tells her. He wanted them to explore a dungeon together, but if she doesn't feel like it, he'll find someone else. She immediately tells him they can explore a dungeon together, and they head over to a dungeon entrance immediately. They enter the dungeon, and Tao takes down several monsters, trying to impress Lloyd, but he's more interested in the glowing rocks scattered all over the cave floor. Tao must have felt bad that a male was more interested in smooth rocks than he was in her. They move deeper into the cave, and Lloyd wonders why Tao is adventuring alone. And she tells him she hasn't found suitable comrades, yet they take a break inside the dungeon to prepare some refreshments, and Lloyd asks her about her Kai technique. Tao is surprised. He knows about Kai since not many people know about the technique on his continent. He tells her that Kai is just like mana for sorcerers, and he also tells her he noticed her breathing technique. She tells him that the breathing technique is fundamental to Kai mastery, which allows a human to gain explosive power. She tells him that it takes time to hone breathing techniques, but she looks at him surprised to see that he's practicing the breathing technique. He suddenly chokes, and Tao tells him he can't practice the breathing techniques carelessly because he could hurt himself. Lloyd noticed that he felt an energy force different from his mana, and he realizes he can use the energy to increase his magic power. He decides to teach him more about the Kai technique, and he thanks her for the free tutelage. Her heart suddenly skips a beat, but she sternly tells Lloyd to keep up his breathing technique to hide her reaction. Grimoire can't believe that Lloyd cares about nothing other than learning magic. He's about to have some dessert when Silpha suddenly shows up behind him, which surprises him. Tay demonstrates a Kai blast to Lloyd as she takes down a gray wolf, which she thinks is the boss of the dungeon. She tells him they can now open the chest of the dungeon, but she warns him that the treasure may be underdeveloped because the dungeon isn't high level. Lloyd is intrigued by the system of the dungeon and notices this. They approach the chest, and Town notices that Lloyd has almost fully mastered the breathing technique. She's glad she got herself a keeper, and she's sure even her strict grandpa would approve of Lloyd. She decides to do her best to make sure that Lloyd remains by her side. But Lloyd is more interested in the opening of the chest than her delusive thoughts. Taya opens the chest, and she's almost sliced in half by an energy blade, but Lloyd saves her as the blade cuts through the dungeon floor, where she was standing a moment before a lick rises up menacingly from beneath the chest, which surprises Teo. But Lloyd is hyped to face a new boss. As the eyes glow with anticipation, watch this next video. See you on the next one. Our episode starts with Robert and Tao facing a giant monster. Tao is very tense, and Robert asks her what type of creature the monster is. Tao tells him not to worry and advises him to leave, but Robert refuses and says he wants to see what the monster will do. Tao approaches the monster, uses her magic to throw it outside, apologizes, and then we see the monster preparing to attack Tao. It uses its magic to launch sharp blades at her, but Tao manages to dodge all its attacks. She kicks one of its attacks, breaking it, and wonders to herself how a low-level demon like Dimas could possess such power and something terrifying like the leech creature. Even elite adventurers can barely face it evenly. Tao decides to buy enough time for Robert to escape. The scene shifts to Robert throwing himself outside and pondering about Tao's actions and wanting to know more about the key and also about Dimas. Then a magical circle appears around Robert, helping him to stop, and he wonders if he should go back to Teo despite her throwing him away. He asks his rival, but the rival doesn't respond, surprising Robert. He looks at the rival again, who finally tells him to return home immediately. Robert is shocked by his words, and then the scene shifts back to Tao, who is still fighting the monster. She realizes the monster is too strong and that she can't defeat it. She's about to die. She decides to retreat slowly when suddenly the monster speaks and asks about key techniques in astonishment. Tao is shocked to hear the monster speak to her. It tells her that she possesses a strange art, having consumed someone with similar abilities in the past, but ultimately, it was just a rudimentary form of magic. The monster explains that it's accustomed to consuming the souls of adventurers to gain their wisdom and skills. However, it deems Teo unworthy of consumption, but expresses a desire to eat the person with her, referring to Robert. Tao tells the monster that she and Robert are different, While they both pursue battles, she feels he can find something intriguing about a pebble on the road, which genuinely delights her. She mentions that people on the continent consider ki techniques as a primitive martial art, but Robert said he was amazed. Tao exhales air and attacks the monster, but it uses its magic, creating a magical circle to protect itself from Teo's attacks. The monster informs her that her attacks are ineffective, angering Tao greatly. She strikes the magical sphere repeatedly until she manages to break it, saying, "Don't mess with me." She tells the monster that she has consumed a lot of ki energy and can't keep this up, unable to move. The monster mocks her for wasting her time and energy. It then uses a spell called Mortisicora, dropping a glass panel on Tao, seemingly killing her. However, the glass barrier suddenly shatters, revealing Robert, much to Tao's surprise. Robert tells her that he will take over, though he's in a hurry. Tao asks why he's here and what's the magical sphere protecting them. We then see Robert using air magic, surprising both Tao and the monster with his power. The monster comments that it should be impossible without enchantments. When the monster uses its magic, Robert mentions merging ki with mana. The monster wonders what barrier Robert is setting up, finding it very sturdy. Robert says they almost understand everything, and then instructs them to breathe better, inhaling air to speed up the enemy's spell. After inhaling a lot of air, Robert tells the monster it's natural to seek escape. Then the skeletal structure uses the leech's full power and aims towards the barrier. Meanwhile, Robert also uses his power, but the barrier obstructs him at that moment. Finally, the barrier shatters, making the skeletal structure happy because it can now see its limits. It then uses its full power on him, surrounding him from all directions. However, Robert grabs onto the top of the rock and propels himself with great force, leaping from rock to rock at maximum speed, inhaling more air to convert more ki energy, a spell he always does. He then takes the mana and ki and mixes them together, forming a very large sphere that in turn breaks the enemy's attacks. He is surprised by this but couldn't reach it because she was weak, so she must rise above that to penetrate and move quickly. Robert then creates two very large spheres again and directs them at the leech, but the skeletal structure easily intercepts them. The matter is not yet settled as Robert is very fast and uses more spells on him. He's having a lot of fun and laughs hard because he enjoys doing this, surprising the skeletal structure, which says, "What is this? What is this power?" He attacks with extreme speed without magic. Are these QI techniques impossible? How can simple QI techniques be equivalent to my magic? Robert then uses the most precise and powerful sphere to cut the leech and eliminate it immediately. Tuo is very happy because he has easily defeated the skeletal structure. They then look inside the box and find the old dagger, feeling very sad and saying, "This was a waste of time. All this trouble, and in the end, this old dagger is what we get. How I wished it was a great treasure. But thank God for everything." Robert says to her, "I think it's saturated with mana. It's not an ordinary dagger." She tells him she doesn't mind him taking the dagger, and suddenly something very strange happens. The place starts collapsing. This always happens as soon as the treasure is taken. The Dimes collapses, he tells her, "I understand now." The treasure box is essentially the core of what we call Dimes. Then he pulls it out of the ground before it can swallow him and tries repeatedly, but the task is very difficult. Then he smiles and says, "Oh, Tayo, how amazing this is. What a strange survival instinct." She tells him to shut up, calling him stupid, that it's collapsing, and they might die at this time. Robert then lifts the box upwards, but sharp teeth start falling from everywhere. The scene shifts when they find themselves outside the Dimes, which is completely clear. Robert tells her that this is how it will continue, gathering strength underground until after a while. The Dimes reappears. Teo says to him, "Robert, you are amazing. You fought bravely, but why did you fight in the end with QI techniques instead of magic? Did you do this for me because he used to mock me?" Robert stands up and tells her that he thought it would be enjoyable. Robert then stands up and tells her that he thought it would be very enjoyable, but suddenly remembers that he must return home quickly. She asks Teo about the thing he released in the end, what it is, as it was her secret key shot technique, but she couldn't even use it. Then she tells him that she will train more and more to become an amazing girl. Robert is happy with her words and tells her that whether it's magic or QI techniques, working on improving oneself is always enjoyable and they must improve together. Teo is very happy and decides to train herself more and more to become a girl who can catch his attention. Then she called out to him very loudly, asking him how he could reach her. But Robert didn't answer her and returned home, entering his room from the window, where he found his rival lying on the ground from exhaustion and fatigue because of their servant. She had beaten him because he was too weak, as she would toughen her heart to retrain him from scratch, as he didn't even have a chance, despite being a demon. Then we go back to the scene when Robert was in the Dimas with Tayo, where he put a lot of things in his bag, astonishing Tayo. She doesn't know how his bag can hold all of that. Robert tells her that this bag has a magical enchantment of spatial type that can freely enhance the internal space of any type of bag. Then we see Robert in his room where he empties the bag of everything in it. Among these things is this small sword, which angers his assistant because he was delayed in returning home due to such a trivial knife. Robert answers him that it is a very amazing treasure. First, they immerse the knife in hot water, then scrape the surface of the knife to extract this thing, which is the catalyst used for the enchantment magic. It is found in any sword to strengthen it, so Robert understands that the knife has been enchanted with the strengthening power. His friend asks him if he can study the enchantment magic or not. Robert answers that studying this magic is not that simple because this was the essence of the mana used on the knife. The essence of mana is hard to come by, and enchantment spells are hard to perform. If they fail, both the essence and the weapon will be wasted. That's why Robert will analyze the essence of mana and make some magic for himself. Robert uses the purification spell to purify the dirty water. If he continues to raise the purity levels, he can even separate all the key elements. Indeed, the elements of this water are found to be oil, silver, and hematite. He thinks for a moment and understands that this is made from crushing a monster's core, which is also very rare. Then he looks at the box he brought from the Dimes and realizes that he has the Dimes' core so he can make some through it. This means he needs oil, silver, and a lot of weapons. We then move to the king, Robert's father, where his son goes to him and asks for silver coins suitable for his work. His father asks if he's sure he doesn't want gold coins, and Robert tells him he doesn't need them, as silver coins are very suitable for him. He takes what he needs from his father and returns to his workshop. His father doesn't understand what Robert wants to do with these silver coins. Next, Robert goes to his workshop and puts all the silver coins in the fire. After that, in the garden, we see the maid training Robert. He tries to defeat her to take the oil he wants, but he couldn't do anything. Robert trains with Sylvia, and she becomes stronger than him, disappearing somewhere under this small statue, and Robert doesn't know where she is. Suddenly, she strikes him with the sword, causing Robert to scream and destroy the small statue. Then he tells her that she won. And after that, we see Robert holding this thing and asking her if she's sure. She remembers that the agreement was that he had to hit her with a blow during their humorous battle to get the oil. Sylvia answers that she's very happy, but wondered why he performed weakly that day. She thinks to herself, remembering Robert's fight with her. Possessing a skill like this with magic and a sword at the age of 10 could make Prince Lloyd a knight commander when he grows up, and he might become very strong to be a master swordsman. Then Robert asks for her permission and quickly leaves, saying, "I'll show you when I'm done." She wishes that whatever he cooks will be delicious. Robert enters this room and starts preparing, saying, "Silver to oil." Along with hematite, we get the mana essence. The scene then shifts to Prince Al talking to Robert, saying, "Do you want a stock of weapons to test the enchantment magic on them? It's very funny that you ask me for this. You love magic a lot." Robert answers, "Yes, there are many royal guards who serve you." Then Prince Al asks the guards if any of his brothers want to enhance the power of their weapons. They all respond in unison, "Yes, definitely," and they leave all the swords they had with them. After that, the rival says to Robert, very motivated, "We will enchant these cursed weapons and make them unbeatable weapons." Then Robert tries the enchantment on the first sword, applying 2 layers and 3 layers as well, filling every point he can with enchanting formulas, but the sword breaks. Robert says, "I messed up. The steel couldn't handle the enchantments I added to it. He tries the rest of the swords, failing with some and succeeding with others. In the morning, he goes to Prince Al, who is amazed that out of 120 weapons, only 50 succeeded. Robert apologizes, saying, "In the end, I wasted 70, but in reality, 80 succeeded until I tried adding other enchantments to some." The prince sees the first sword, saying that the success rate of the primary enchantment is about 10. He finds it unbelievable and thinks Lloyd might be more talented than expected. The guards take the swords and laugh at him. One of them suggests that maybe the prince gave up because 70 weapons were ruined and puts one in its sheath, but it breaks due to the sword's strength. Prince Al sees this sword and is astonished. Robert tells him that he hoped to see it used in battle if possible. The prince asks if he wants to accompany them. His father gave him a mission to hunt a monster. Robert is surprised by what he hears. And so today's episode ends. Stay tuned for the next episodes, but don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell to receive all the latest updates.